the 7th of October, 2023. The sun had not yet reached its zenith when the borders around Gaza broke. From the air came the screaming roar of rockets. From the sea, the churn of speedboats. And from the land, silence, until it was broken by gunfire and screams. It wasn't the first time Gaza bled, but this time, it bled differently, with more fury, more chaos, more purpose. By dusk, bodies lined the fields of southern Israel. Military bases lay overrun. Entire families vanished from festival grounds where music still echoed in the dust, and a question pierced through the rubble like a cry in the dark. How did it come to this? The world has long seen this strip of land, Gaza, as a flashpoint, a wound that never healed. But on that October morning, the wound tore open, wider than ever before. Was it madness? Or strategy? A failure of intelligence? Or the price of arrogance? Was Hamas trying to destroy Israel? Or provoke a war they could survive better than peace? And what of Israel itself? The state? The idea? Is it stronger today? Or fractured by what followed? This is not just the story of one attack. It is the tale of decades of suffocation, of choices made in shadows, of politics shaped by fear, vengeance, and prophecy. This is the Israel-Hamas War of 2023, and perhaps the beginning of something worse. To understand why the earth shook in October 2023, we must look far before the rockets launched. Back to the First Intifada, the Palestinian uprising of 1987. In the ashes of despair and under Israeli occupation, a new force emerged: Hamas. Rooted in Sunni Islamist ideology, Hamas sought not just resistance, but the total liberation of what they considered historic Palestine. Their charter did not hide its goals. There was no room for Israel in their vision. Still, they built more than bunkers. They built hospitals, schools, and crucially, political capital. In 2006, Hamas won the Palestinian legislative elections. A year later, they violently ousted rival faction Fatah from Gaza, seizing full control of the Strip. Since then, Gaza has been a cage sealed by Israel's blockade, strangled by economic collapse, and riddled with periodic wars. The world called it containment, but to many Palestinians, it was a slow suffocation. And Hamas? They called it proof. Proof that only armed resistance could break the cage. Israel, in turn, labeled Hamas a terrorist organization. Not just Israel, but the United States, the European Union, and many others. Still, support for Hamas didn't vanish. In fact, it grew. By 2023, frustration had reached a boiling point. In the West Bank, settlement expansions increased. Administrative detentions, often indefinite, mounted, and settler violence escalated with impunity. A poll from the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research revealed a troubling number. 72% of West Bank Palestinians backed armed resistance. Hamas watched and waited. In the months before October, they bolstered their fighting forces. They tested rockets. They trained paragliders. They tunneled deeper. Warnings came from Egypt, from the United States, even from Israel's own intelligence units. But Mossad and Israeli command were unconvinced. They believed Hamas had been deterred, that another full war was the last thing Hamas could afford. They were wrong. At dawn on the 7th of October, Hamas revealed its hand. Codename: Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. It began with a massive rocket barrage, over 1,000 projectiles raining down on Israeli military and civilian targets. But the rockets were only the overture. Simultaneously, over 3,000 fighters breached the Israeli border. Paragliders flew over watchtowers. Drones disabled surveillance posts. Speedboats landed on Israeli beaches. And armed convoys poured through the broken fences. They struck with terrifying precision. At the Zikkim beach, militants landed and gunned down 10 civilians, with 9 more executed in a nearby shelter. At the Nahal Oz base, Hamas fighters killed 2 Israeli soldiers and captured 6. At the Reem military base, chaos. The base was overrun. Some soldiers were executed, others taken hostage. And then came the most haunting scenes. The Reem Music Festival, where hundreds had gathered to dance, was transformed into a killing field. Dozens died. Many more were dragged into Gaza as captives. Israeli women were reportedly subjected to sexual violence, later confirmed by forensic teams. The world watched in horror. Israel reacted in rage, but the damage had been done. This was the worst attack on Israeli soil since the state's founding, not just in numbers, but in its symbolism. It shattered the illusion of control. It exposed the fragility of Israel's southern frontier, and it lit a fuse no one could extinguish. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stood before the nation and made it clear, "We are at war, and we will turn all places where Hamas hides into cities of ruins." The Israeli Defense Forces launched Operation Swords of Iron. The skies over Gaza turned black with smoke. Over 300 sites were bombed in the first 4 hours. But precision was elusive. Confusion reigned. Helicopters couldn't distinguish between militants and civilians. Some pilots opened fire without confirmed targets. And Hamas? They had trained for this. They blended in, walking calmly amid air raid chaos, mimicking civilian behavior to avoid detection. Meanwhile, Hamas propaganda surrogate, claiming Israeli airstrikes caused the bulk of civilian deaths, even where Israeli forensics suggested otherwise. And into this fog of war came tragedy. Evacuation orders were issued to over 1 million civilians in northern Gaza. They were told to flee south quickly. But where could they go? Many refused, fearing Israeli bombs would fall no matter where they ran. Hamas urged them to stay put, a deliberate tactic, some said, to create human shields. Israel countered that Hamas placed rocket sites and command posts in civilian areas. Both sides accused the other of war crimes. Meanwhile, bodies piled higher. Hospitals, schools, even convoys of ambulances came under attack. A strike on the Jabalia refugee camp killed dozens, mostly women and children. A second strike, even more deadly, followed days later. Human Rights Watch raised alarms. Turkey withdrew its ambassador. And still the bombs fell. By November, over 400,000 Gazans were displaced, many pushed into Khan Yunis, a Hamas stronghold now bracing for battle. Israel's offensive was only beginning. By mid-November, the nature of the war had shifted. The skies still roared with drones and jets, but the real battle had gone underground. Literally, the Israeli Defense Forces intensified their operations in northern Gaza, targeting Hamas's tunnel networks known as the Gaza Metro. These tunnels were not merely escape routes. They were the spinal cord of Hamas's military machine, linking bunkers, supply caches, and command centers beneath schools, hospitals, and homes. For Israel, destroying these tunnels was paramount. On the 13th of November, Israeli forces stormed the Al-Rantisi hospital, claiming it concealed Hamas infrastructure. What they found, according to IDF reports, was a suspected holding area for Israeli hostages, including signs of captivity, and a calendar marked Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. The symbolism was potent, but the evidence was hotly debated. Investigations by outlets like the Washington Post later found no concrete signs of a command center beneath the hospital. Instead, they found broken beds, empty rooms, ambiguity. In war, truth becomes its own casualty. The Al-Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest, soon became the next flashpoint. Israeli forces entered under the justification of humanitarian aid and hostage recovery. They claimed to have discovered weapons stashed within another link to Hamas's operations, but the images shared by the IDF raised questions. A few rifles, some uniforms. Was that proof of a command hub? Or a desperate attempt to justify an invasion of a medical sanctuary? Palestinian officials cried foul. The UN and global humanitarian organizations raised alarms, This was not just about tunnels. It was about the optics of legitimacy. And amidst it all, the hostages. Dozens of Israelis, civilians, soldiers, even children remained in Hamas's grasp. Their names were whispered through Israeli media like prayers. Their images held in candlelight vigils across Tel Aviv. The demand was simple: bring them home. But Hamas had demands too: a ceasefire, and the release of Palestinian prisoners, many held in Israel without trial. Negotiations flared, then stalled, then sparked again. And finally, on the 22nd of November, a temporary ceasefire was reached. Brokered by Qatar and Egypt, the deal saw hostages exchanged for detainees. A moment of calm, a breath in the storm. For 7 days, the bombs stopped. Families wept as loved ones emerged from captivity. Wounds were licked, not healed, but it was short-lived. By the 1st of December, the truce collapsed. Israel accused Hamas of breaking terms. Hamas accused Israel of never intending to de-escalate. The war resumed, with a vengeance. When Israel resumed its military campaign, it shifted southward toward Khan Yunis, a dense urban sprawl, an alleged nerve center of Hamas leadership. But this pivot created a cruel paradox. Hundreds of thousands of Gazans had already been pushed south, following Israel's own evacuation orders. They had fled their homes in the north to escape death, only to find death waiting for them again. The city became a labyrinth of urban warfare. Apartment buildings turned to fortresses. Shops became sniper nests. Civilians became collateral. By late December, over 400,000 Gazans were trapped in the southern war zone. The United Nations and countless NGOs pleaded for the creation of humanitarian corridors, safe zones for aid delivery and civilian escape. Israel allowed some, under pressure, but they were narrow, unpredictable, and often interrupted by airstrikes. Accusations of genocide and ethnic cleansing surfaced in media and international forums. Israel rejected them as propaganda. But optics mattered, especially as images of dead children, flattened homes, and crowded hospital wards flooded the global stage. Meanwhile, Hamas fighters dug in. Armed with anti-tank missiles and operating from tunnels and alleys, they continued to strike Israeli vehicles, claim ambushes, and retreat into the dark. The war was no longer about territory. It was about attrition, resistance, and the narrative. Israel claimed military gains. Hamas claimed moral victories. And in the middle stood the people of Gaza, unarmed, unseen, and uncounted. On the 24th of December, a Hamas delegation arrived in Cairo to restart ceasefire talks. There was hope again. But hope is fragile, especially when surrounded by fire. As bullets flew and bombs fell, another battle unfolded, this one in diplomatic halls and UN Security Council chambers. The United States, Israel's most important ally, maintained its support publicly. President Biden emphasized Israel's right to defend itself. But even within Washington, doubts emerged. Why had so many civilians died? Where were the humanitarian guarantees? Was Israel undermining its own moral high ground? European nations too began to waver. France, Spain, and Ireland condemned specific Israeli actions. Turkey went further, recalling its ambassador and calling for an arms embargo. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the UN's human rights body spoke of war crimes. And not just by Hamas, but by Israel as well. They cited indiscriminate bombing of civilian zones, use of white phosphorus munitions, attacks on hospitals and schools, delays in aid delivery. Israel dismissed the claims and continued its campaign. But globally, a shift was occurring. What had begun as universal sympathy for Israel on the 7th of October was now fracturing into skepticism, fatigue, and quiet condemnation. And yet, Hamas was no hero. Their tactics, including the use of human shields, civilian staging zones, and indiscriminate rocket fire, drew equal ire. The war became a mirror, revealing the moral compromises of all sides. By January of 2024, tens of thousands of lives had been lost. Gaza's infrastructure lay in ruins. Electricity was gone, water scarce, hospitals overwhelmed. The mental wounds, perhaps deeper than the physical, lingered among survivors, both Palestinian and Israeli. And the hostages? Many remained, their fate unknown. Israel claimed tactical victories, tunnels destroyed, Hamas leaders eliminated, weapons seized. But at what cost? Hamas was bruised, but not broken. And Palestinians, even those who hated Hamas, now faced rubble where their homes once stood, and hunger where there had once been food. For Israel, the war had redrawn its internal politics. Right-wing factions pushed for permanent reoccupation of Gaza. Others warned this would only guarantee eternal resistance. The region had changed. But had it healed? The answer, like the dust still swirling over Gaza, remains suspended. Some wars end with treaties, some with silence. This war may not end at all. Long after the last bullet is fired, history remains. But who writes it? In conflicts like these, tangled in faith, identity, and generations of blood truth, becomes the rarest casualty. On the 7th of October, Israelis experienced a horror that cut deeper than any since the Holocaust, a national trauma in real time. Entire families were wiped out. Civilians murdered in their homes, on the road, and at a music festival meant to celebrate life. The brutality was documented. The grief was raw. For Israel, this was existential, a reminder that even with all their defenses, they were still vulnerable. But across the divide, Palestinians watched a different horror unfold. Hospitals bombed, entire city blocks vaporized, children pulled from rubble not once, but daily. For them, this wasn't new. It was just the latest chapter in what many describe as a lifetime under siege. And so two narratives formed parallel, irreconcilable, yet equally real. For Israel, this war was a necessary reckoning. For Hamas, it was defiance against permanent humiliation. And for Gaza's civilians, it was a war they never chose, but were made to survive or die in. But it's not just bullets that shape wars. It's images. It's videos on TikTok, shared by survivors or propagandists. It's global protests, from Paris to Jakarta. It's hashtags that trend louder than official statements. We live in a time when history is written as it happens, and the battlefield of memory may be more decisive than anything on the ground. And in that arena, no side walks away untouched. It would be easy to believe this war is unique. Its scale, its media coverage, its political ripple effects. But in truth, it is hauntingly familiar. From the Second Intifada to the wars of 2009, 2014, and beyond, a pattern emerges. A strike, a retaliation, civilian killed, a ceasefire, silence. Then years later it begins again. Each side claims deterrence. Each side claims the other started it, but no one breaks the pattern. Why? Perhaps it is because both Hamas and the Israeli government benefit politically from conflict. For Hamas, war galvanizes public support, erases internal critics, and forces international attention. For Israel's hardliners, war silences peace advocates, justifies harsher security measures, and unites a fractured public. And then there's the outside world, always urging restraint, yet still selling weapons, funding militaries, building walls instead of bridges. And the greatest tragedy? It's not just that the world has seen this before, it's that it has learned nothing. In late December, as Christmas lights blinked on across western cities, Gaza's nights remained dark. Electricity was gone. Fue la insevered. Telecommunications blocked by Israeli operations targeting fuel-dependent cell towers. Amid this silence, a new ceasefire was proposed. Hamas delegations arrived in Cairo for renewed talks. Egypt acted again as the broker, this time supported by Qatar and the United Nations. The proposed deal was clear: release remaining hostages, a phased withdrawal of Israeli forces, delivery of humanitarian aid, and a renewed commitment to future negotiations. But Israel hesitated. Within Netanyahu's war cabinet, voices clashed. Some urged accepting the deal. Others insisted that Hamas had not yet been crippled. And so, while diplomats argued behind closed doors, the bombs continued to fall. The ceasefire talks collapsed before they even began. On New Year's Eve, the world counted down to midnight. In Gaza, another hospital was hit. As 2024 dawned, a haunting truth settled over the Middle East. No one had won. Hamas still held ground, militarily weaker, but not dismantled. Israel still wielded unmatched force, but at a cost to its international standing. And in Gaza, there was little left to destroy. Entire neighborhoods were gone, thousands dead, millions grieving, a generation of orphans. And yet, the question remains unanswered. What comes next? If Israel reoccupies Gaza, it risks a forever war of insurgency. If it withdraws without a plan, Hamas may rebuild. If international actors impose peace, who enforces it? And perhaps the darkest possibility, what if this war was only the beginning? In the north, Hezbollah stirs. In the West Bank, unrest brews. In Iran, opportunity glimmers. Across the world, polarization sharpens. Supporters of Israel and Palestine no longer just argue, they fight. Online and in the streets. Universités divident. Parliaments debate. Friendships fracture. What began as a regional conflict now threatens global stability. There is a saying in Arabic, between two fires, the olive tree still grows. But how long can it survive? The olive tree, ancient symbol of peace and rootedness, has long been the emblem of Palestine. And yet, every war scorches more of its soil. What has the world learned? That vengeance breeds ashes? That power without purpose corrupts? That trauma, when unhealed, becomes policy? Or have we learned nothing at all? Because the real tragedy of the Israel-Hamas war of 2023 is not just in the number of dead, but in how predictable it was, and how little the world did to stop it. The rubble will be cleared. New buildings will rise. Children will return to school, those who survived. And somewhere, someone will begin planning the next war. Unless, one day, someone decides enough. But that day is not today. 14. And note, if this film moved you, if it helped you understand not just what happened, but why it keeps happening, then share it. Let people know what this war means, not just for the Middle East, but for all of us. History is not just about memory. It is about responsibility. This has been Legacy Files. Until next time, ask not just what happened, but what we let happen.